Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the final evening of our third International Storytelling Festival here in Bratislava, Slovakia. We are Príbehom na stope, aka Story Hunters. And we've had 3 wonderful days full of, well, stories, music. We also discussed storytelling in Slovakia. We had workshops and lots of mini adventures. Now, tonight, here we are to conclude our festival with an international round of storytellers. Before we do that, I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us, and we would also like to thank the Slovak Arts Council for supporting us again this year. Now, in the past, we used to have a theme for our international evening. But we thought that because we've all had such a challenging year, or maybe years, it would be better to leave it open and see which stories want and need to come alive tonight. And the first storyteller whose story will come alive tonight is Barbara Leeney Erde, who is joining us from Austria tonight. Am I right? Hi.
Yes, that's right. Hi.
Hi, Barbara. So you and the other 2 storytellers that we are going to hear later tonight, and Martina from Slovakia, you have been meeting up for quite some time. So I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about this little group that you have formed.
Yes, of course. So firstly, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are a group that was brought together completely by fate, by chance. We all happened to attend the same storytelling course during the spring of 2021, which was online because it was still a time of lockdowns and travel restrictions. And we were all a little bit skeptical, uncomfortable about online storytelling. But it was such a wonderful opportunity because we're all from such different places in the world that if it happened, we would never have been able to come together and meet. And on this course, it was such a huge course. There were so many people on this course that we were asked to randomly put ourselves into breakout groups. And there are actually 5 of us. Just happened to sign up to the same group, and we've been meeting ever since. So the course finished, but we thought we had so much to discuss. We happen to have so much in common. We're 5 women who are all somehow between cultures. For example, I'm Russian, but I grew up in England, and the kind of finding our way how to belong together somewhere. So we called ourselves the Balancing Belonging Group. And yeah, we've been meeting about once a month online ever since.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, I may have told you that we don't have a theme for tonight, but at the venue where we held our events yesterday and on Friday, we had this most beautiful installation, and it was a real parachute, and it was hung off the ceiling, and it kind of became a symbol of our festival this year because really, when we listen to a story, we kind of jump into it. So I would like to invite all of you who are listening or watching tonight to put on your backpacks with your parachutes and, step to the edge of the cliff with us. Maybe you want to check your parachute and your harness. You might need to deploy it later. But for now, just take a deep breath in. And when you're ready, and when you are ready, Barbara, let's all jump in.
Thank you very much. It's good that you have your parachutes because we are heading off to the Scottish mountains. This story is a traditional Celtic tale, but is perhaps one of the not very well-known ones. And it is something that came alive for me during one of our sessions of our group, because we discussed stories, traditional stories that have an ending, but that we will not tell the ending, and we will leave that open for each one of you to feel what is the right ending for you. So, on certain sunny autumn days like today, the village girls would go out berry picking. They would take their wicker baskets and head up the lane into the forested foothills of the Scottish mountains. Now, some girls, they just wanted to pick as many berries as quickly as possible and rush off home. Some girls just wanted to spend the day laughing and singing and talking with their friends. They did not really pay much attention to what they were picking. But this girl, she really wanted to pick only the very, very best berries. The sweetest, ripest, juiciest berries that she could find. And she was so focused on her task, selecting maybe only one or two from each bush, that she did not notice that she was going further and further and further away from her companions. And it was not until much, much later that she looked up and she realized she was no longer in the foothills, but she had walked up into the mountains themselves. And the shadows were already growing long, and the sun was sinking down below the horizon, and it was definitely time to turn back and go home. But she had only got a little way when suddenly the weather changed, as it can in the mountains. The air grew chilly, and a thick fog rolled in. And it was not many minutes later that the fog was so thick that she could hardly see where she was going. And she froze in fear. She dared not go on. What if she slipped and fell down a steep ravine? But she dared not stay where she was either, because she had heard that there were bears and wolves, and worse still, giants and trolls in these parts. And as she hesitated, not knowing what to do, suddenly she saw coming out of the fog a pair of brown eyes. And then another pair, and another pair, and another, and another. She saw they had smooth black noses, soft brown ears, and out of the fog came a pair of antlers. They were a herd of deer. And the first deer very clearly stepped forward and seemed to be beckoning her, telling her to come with them. So she did. She followed them. And they led her on a steep, rocky path, but being very careful, deer in front, deer behind, to keep her safe. They walked for a long time until they came to a small valley that showed clearly signs of people living there. There were fences and a barn, and from the mouth of a cave there came smoke and the flickering light of a fire. And the deer led her up to this cave, and there she saw, sitting inside, a very old man and a very old woman. The old woman looked up and smiled. "You are back, my dears." And the deer nudged her forward so that the girl stood in the firelight. And the old woman looked at her and said, Who is this that you have brought to me?" Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I was lost in the mountains, and your deer, they found me and they brought me here. Please, would you be able to give me shelter for the night? All I have to offer are these berries, but I'm very much in need of your help. And the old woman looked at the old man, and the old man looked at the old woman and gave her a small nod. And she said, "Yes, come in, you are welcome. You may stay, we will give you shelter, but if you stay, you cannot stay only for one night. You must stay for a year and a night, and help us with our tasks, for we are old and also in need of help." Well, what could the girl do? She agreed. She was welcomed into the cave, and the deer filed in behind her, and the woman milked the deer and separated some milk to be kept for milk and other milk to be made into soft curd cheese. And at this point, the girl noticed that the old man was working with this soft curd, constantly making and shaping small figures, all sorts of different figures with his hands. They had a delicious supper of creamy porridge, to which were added those sweet, juicy, ripe berries. The deer went back out into the barn for the night, and she was shown where to sleep in a dry, warm corner of the cave. And as she went to bed, she saw that the old man was still sitting there, moulding those small figures, and the old woman was taking those figures and putting them into a large pot over the fire, stirring them, and steam was rising up in strange swirling patterns. And as she watched them, she went to sleep. From the next morning, she began to learn all of the chores and the daily tasks of life with the old man and the old woman and the herd of deer. Every morning they would be milked and sent out to the pastures. Then there was the cave to be tidied, the firewood to be brought in, the water to be fetched, supper to be cooked. And every evening the deer would return, they would need to be milked again and put into the barn. And so it went on, day after day, night after night. The seasons outside the cave changed one to the other, but the pattern of daily life in the cave remained largely the same. Chores all day, looking after the deer and the old man and the old woman. And in the evening, she would go to bed and she would see that the old man was always sitting there, moulding those small figures, and the old woman was placing them into the pot and stirring and watching the swirling mist rise up. And so it went on. And the girl became more and more comfortable and happy with her life there with the old man, the old woman, and the deer. Until one day, when the leaves were turning again and the berries were ripe again on the bushes, the old woman said to her, "Do you know what today is? Today it is exactly 1 year since you came here. And so that means that this is your last night with us." And the girl felt very sad to be leaving them. She had really enjoyed her time there, but she knew that it was the right thing. That was the next step to go on. And that evening, as usual, she prepared the fire and the food, and as it was time for her to go to bed, and she went to her bed, the old man beckoned her back and said, "Come, sit with us tonight. You have watched us work patiently all year, and you have helped us greatly, and you have never asked us what it is that we do. And now is the time to tell you. These figures that I make here, they are what people see at night when they sleep. The good, the bad, the happy, the sad. Things that have been, things that can never be, and things that will be. And every night we send them out into the world for people to see in their sleep. For we are the makers of dreams. And since you came to us, every night we have been moulding and shaping and sending out into the world a special dream just for you. And tomorrow it will be time for you to go and look for that dream." And the girl realized that that was, in the whole year, that was the first and only time that she had heard him speak. And that evening she sat up all night with them, helping them to mould these figures and place them into the pot and stir the pot, all night long, until the sky lightened outside and the first rays of sun crept into the cave. And then it was time for her to go. She followed the deer out that morning, and they showed her the path for her to go down. She would go down, down out of the mountains and out into the world to follow her dream. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara, for taking us and guiding us through this leap. Now, the second storyteller to join us today is joining us from Finland, and it is María Serrano. Hello, María.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, great. Well, you know, I have another question for you as well. On Friday, we were discussing storytelling, and many people had the same questions. Where do stories come from? And where do the storytellers find their stories? Or is it the other way around? Is it the stories that find the storytellers? So I was wondering, could you help us out and tell us?
Well, we just heard where dreams come from. Stories. I think stories are, in a way, part of our heritage, really. I think they come from another realm, in a way. And I think that the stories find their storytellers. I would say that. I mean, I have lots of books, but time and again I find that a certain book pops up, or a book that I've been looking for that has been lost appears just when I need it. And one of the most beautiful stories I have about that was once when I was on a tour telling stories, and I met a woman and I so wanted to share a specific story with her. And I thought, gosh, but where is it? I haven't seen the books for years. And I thought, how can I find that book? Where is it? And I went back to the hotel room, and I had brought the book. For no reason whatever, I had brought that book that I thought I hadn't seen for years with me, among the 4 or 5 books I had. So the following day I could lend her the book and tell her the story was there.
Thank you so much. So I hope that this satisfies everybody who has been asking these questions. Now, Barbara guided us through the initial leap, because remember, we're flying now. We're flying down the cliffside. And with Maria, we're just going to enjoy the flight. So when you're ready, Maria, let's fly.
Let's fly. I invite you to listen to this story that is written originally by a Swedish author called Elsa Beskow. The story is about 100 years old and has been very dear and very close to me for many years. Once upon a time, there was an old man, mould in tiny figures that he put in a pot and that became the dreams of people. And one of those dreams arrived in a forest where a young prince was sleeping. He was sleeping in a clearance just by an ash tree, and it had been an exciting day. It was an exciting day because it was his 15th birthday. He was going to ride out into the world soon and seek for happiness. But you know how young men can be. Suddenly he felt so tired and he fell asleep in the forest by the ash tree. And as he was lying there fast asleep, he dreamt. And in his dream there was a young woman with very pale skin and grey eyes and long, long hair that was almost the colour of the sand of the river banks. And he could hear her say, "Little brother, have you forgotten me?" So he woke up startled, and then he heard her again when he fell asleep. "Little brother, have you forgotten me?" And for a third time, he heard her question. So he rose up startled, and his beret was caught in a branch, and when he tried to untangle it, he saw that there was a tiny little ring on that branch. So he took the ring and he looked at it, and he saw there was a name inside this tiny ring who looked like the ring of a child, and it said Signalil. And he thought, Signalil, wasn't that the name of my sister whom we're not allowed to talk about? My sister who died when I was little? So he rode back to the castle. He rode really fast. He wanted to see his old nanny, who was not working anymore, but she had a little room in the tower, and he rushed up the stairs. She was so happy to see him, and he said, "Nanny, I want to talk about Signalil, my sister." And Nanny said, "My dear boy, we're not allowed to." And he said, "But I'm 15 now, I need to talk about her." So Nanny told her about this beautiful child. She was 7 when she disappeared. She'd been a child who loved the forest, who loved the trees, who loved being out there, and who felt so constrained in the castle, in the park, where everything was pruned. So Nanny would take her time and again out into the forest, and there her cheeks would go all rosy, and it was almost as if she spoke to the birds and the trees there. But then, when she was almost 7, her parents decided that she needed to be trained to be a princess. Now she needed to learn the things that a princess needed to know. So they got her a noble woman who would be her teacher and be with her all day long. I think she was called Baroness von Strict. And Baroness von Strict, she taught Signalil the embroidery with fine silk and writing tiny letters that all looked the same, and learning by heart the most boring things. No stories, nothing like that, but very boring poems that everybody had learned for years and years and years, and tables of names of kings and queens in the kingdom, all these things. And when they had a rest, when they had a little break, they would walk up and down the park. And Nanny had said that they actually looked as if it was a warden and a prisoner walking in the park. And Signalil would ask Nanny, please take me to the woods again, take me to the forest, but Nanny didn't dare to because she wasn't allowed. And then one day, maybe somebody had left the gate ajar, nobody knew, but the girl disappeared. And they looked for her for weeks and weeks on end, until her little beautiful white embroidered dress appeared in the stream. I then realized that she had probably drowned, that she was dead. And the queen, she couldn't handle the pain, she couldn't take it. The queen went mad and sick with pain, and they decided nobody was ever allowed to speak about Signalil again. I shouldn't have spoken about her, Nanny said. But the prince said, I think she's alive. I think she lives in the forest. I will go back and look for her, he said. And Nanny said, you be careful of the skogsrå, the forest spirit, and the huldra. You know that woman that has a hole in her back, that is all empty behind, and has this green tousled hair. You be careful. And he promised to be very, very careful. And he was 15 and off he rode. And when he ran in the forest, he couldn't find the tree again, but he did find a little bird that was trapped. So he helped the bird, and there he stood, and he was so, so thirsty after riding so fast. And he just said, oh, I wish I could drink from that stream. I wish I had something to drink from. And whoa, suddenly there was a hand giving him a beautiful crystal glass, and he was almost about to take it. There was some sort of exquisite liquid in it. And the bird cried out and said, be careful of that woman. And then he saw the green tousled hair that was coming out from her hood. And he grabbed her, and he held her, and he said, oh, you huldra, I'll kill you here and now. He drew his sword, and the huldra said, don't you kill me, I can take you to your sister. So she did. She took him back to the ashen tree, and while they were by the tree, she said, are you sure you want to wake her up? And he said, absolutely, I want her awake here with me now. So she said, well, you should be careful, because people who have lived in the silence of plants sometimes can't take the noise of humans. He held on to her and said, I'll kill you if you don't give me my sister back. So she started stroking the branch, and she stroked the tiny leaves and the trunk of the tree, and she sang some magic words, and suddenly you could see how two of the branches became tiny little arms stretching up, and you could see how the leaves started to form into hair, and you could see how the trunk became legs. And while the prince was looking at his sister, off the huldra went, and he held on to her. He pulled down her arms and held her and said, dear sister, I'm here to fetch you now. You can wake up now. Because her eyes were closed, as if she were asleep. So he rocked her, and she woke up. And she said, oh, what's happened to my branches? My roots can't feel anything. And he said happily, well, you are a human again. And what a beautiful young woman you have become. Let's go home to father and mother. So they rode. She was wearing a green dress. He put her in front of her on the horse, and they rode back to the castle. And as you can imagine, in the castle, there was a delight. The people who had seen them, they thought that maybe that odd woman in front of the prince was a skogsrå, the spirit of the forest, or maybe she was even a huldra. But the prince seemed so happy, and soon people started hearing about the forest princess and about her beauty. And they didn't see much of her in the beginning because the queen and king, who were delighted, were also a bit confused with their daughter, who had returned, who didn't behave like a princess. She was a bit strange at times. And they tried to teach her the ways of a princess. They got her a singing teacher, a dancing teacher. They got her all sorts of teachers. And her singing teacher was very happy. Oh, she sang so beautifully, like an angel. The dance teacher wasn't happy at all. She never learned any steps. And she said, "Oh, Father, Mother, let me show you what I can do, how I dance." And out she went, and she danced like the swirling snowflakes in winter, she said, like the happy stream in spring, like the blossoming summer flowers, like the whirling leaves in autumn. And it was beautiful, and the king was so moved, and the queen wasn't that happy because she kept doing these funny things. When it started raining, she'd rush out into the rain. She stood there, arms up, head back, as if she wanted to get as much water as possible. And she told her off, and she said she was sorry. She did. She was really sorry. But what happened then? If it was a beautiful morning with dew, out she went barefoot in the garden. And all the ladies in waiting, they followed her, and they took off their beautiful silk stockings and stood there barefoot in the dew. It was difficult. It wasn't that easy. But they loved her dearly. And she loved riding out with her brother. She would speak to squirrels and birds, and there was a beautiful deer, a hind, that was her friend and would follow them back almost to the palace. Stayed just at the edge of the forest. In winter she became quite lethargic, didn't want to do much, but in spring again her step was gay and she was happy. It was as if she was blossoming. And one spring day she met King Alaric. She had had many suitors and not been interested in any of them, but now she met King Alaric and she really liked him. She went to her brother and she said, "Oh, brother, he is like someone I dreamt of when I was a tree. His dreams are my dreams. His thoughts are my thoughts. I know it, even if I haven't even talked to him." And her brother was so happy for her, and he said, "Oh, sister, then I will leave you now, and I will ride out and seek happiness." But she said, please wait, I find it so difficult to speak to people. Nobody understands me like you. I want you to stay. I trust you so much. Can you stay a little bit more?" And he did. He stayed, even if she was engaged to King Alaric. Now, in the beginning, it was beautiful and bubbly and exciting. Well, the way it is when you've just met someone. You think you know how they are. You think you know they are the one you've been dreaming of. Be it as a tree, be it as man, be it as a woman. And you think you share the same dreams. But one day she appeared in distress in her mother's bedroom. And she said, Mother, I cannot marry Alaric. He doesn't hear what the birds sing. He doesn't hear the starling. He doesn't understand starling nor nightingale. I can't marry him. And the mother said, "Oh, well, never mind, Not everybody can listen to the birds like you do. He has other thoughts in his mind. He lives in the city. He comes out to see you. He thinks about important things. But you shouldn't mind." And she went back to bed a little bit downcast. The following day, the following night, she was back knocking at her mother's door, and she said, "Mother," with a trembling voice, "Mother," she said, "I cannot marry Alaric." "I cannot, Mother," she said. "He crushes the flowers with his boots. When he walks, he doesn't see the flowers." And the Queen said, "Oh, my darling, he only has eyes for you when he walks with you. Now, don't be a silly little girl. Just think of how beautiful you will be on your wedding and how soon it will be. And you will have so many other things to think of when you're married, living in the city palace." They quite liked him, the king and the queen. He was handsome, he was well behaved, and he was very rich. And the queen talked to King Alaric about the situation, and she said maybe they should see to this wedding so it could be arranged to be a little bit sooner, because she was getting worried about her daughter and she didn't want to have her so close to the forest anymore. And he said she would have so much to think of when she was in the city palace, so much entertaining. She wouldn't be thinking about all those silly things anymore. And he was happy to arrange for an earlier date for the wedding. So they did. And the evening before the wedding, Princess Signalil knocked on her mother's door and walked into the Queen's chambers, shivering from top to toe. And she said, "Mother, I cannot marry King Alaric. He has killed my best friend." The Queen said, "But darling, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Mother, my dearest little dear, the hind that was my very best friend, he shot her with his arrow. He killed her. I cannot marry the murderer of my best friend." The Queen said, "King Alaric wants to hunt like any man, and you need to become more sensible now. Now you go to your chamber, and you will be the most beautiful and happy bride there is tomorrow. You need not worry anymore. Everything is taken care of. You will be fine. You're just nervous today." And he couldn't possibly know that that deer, that hind, was special to you. They all look the same. You will find new friends. Now you go to sleep. She walked back to her room. But when everyone was asleep, she knocked on her brother's bedroom. And he could hear her knock and opened the door. And she stood there. She was dressed in her green dress, the one she wore when he found her. She was barefoot, and she said, "Oh, please, brother, why did you wake me up? I was dreaming so beautifully in the forest. Please, can you take me back to the forest so I can say goodbye?" And her brother said, "Signalil, I don't think Mother would approve. I don't think Father would approve. You can go back to the forest when you're married, so the birds and the squirrels and all the animals can see how beautiful you are in your wedding dress. You can go back to the forest before you drive to the city. But now you should really go back to sleep." She gave him a hug and turned around and went back to her room. And the following morning she was gone. They looked and looked and looked for her everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. But her brother, he rode his horse back into the forest, back into the clearing. In the clearing, there it was, the beautiful ash tree, lush and green with leaves that were moving softly as if they were saying goodbye. And he held on to the trunk and kissed it and said, "Little sister, dearest Signalil, dream well. Now," he said, "I am off into the world to seek my happiness." And off he went and dreamt many, many dreams after that. And every time he wanted to be with his sister, he knew she would arrive during the night in his dreams. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria, for allowing us to fly with you and glide through this story and this brand new realm. Thank you so much. And now it's the time to introduce our third and final storyteller of this evening, Umi Sinha, who is joining us from the UK today. Hi, Umi.
Hello.
Hi. So, of course, you know, these past few days during our festival, we've been talking about stories. And we've been talking about how important it is to tell stories to one another and listen to stories. And we talked about the difference between reading a story and listening to it. And I wanted to ask you, because you're an author as well as a storyteller, so could you maybe tell us a little bit about this split between being an author and a storyteller?
They overlap very well, actually. I think the biggest difference is that writing is a very lonely activity, really. You're working on your own for a very, very long time, and then you send your book out into the world, and you don't get any feedback. You don't know what's happening. You don't know if the reader is enjoying it. With storytelling, you're in a room full of people. You're part of a community. And the thing I really love is that you don't actually need verbal feedback from people, like a book review, because you know when you're telling a story, when you can see the audience, how they're responding. You can actually feel it in the room. And that, to me, is something I really love. I mean, I think I enjoy writing on a much more intellectual level, but on a kind of human social level, I think storytelling is a lot more rewarding. And I think another big difference is that my writing is, I'm a historical novelist, so it's very much based in reality, whereas stories are very often metaphors, and therefore you can interpret them in a way that, from your own imagination, your own responses to things. So in many ways, I think I like storytelling better than writing.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, with Maria, we were flying down the cliffside, but with Umi, it's time to deploy your parachute. So hold on to your harness, your backpack, find the pull, and when you're ready, let's glide with Umi.
Thank you. The story I'm going to tell you it's by Nancy Schimmel, who is an American storyteller. And it's from this book, Best Love Stories of the, oh, I think it's reversed. I'm not sure if you can see it, but anyway, it's Best Love Stories told at the National Storytelling Festival. And this is a story that I discovered the year I was 60. I was actually feeling a little bit despondent about my life because I thought back when I was 60, which is kind of the age where one normally retires. I thought back to my youth and how I had pictured my life going, what I wanted to achieve, where I would be. And when I looked at my life, it didn't seem to have followed the route that I thought it would. I hadn't been published. I had been working on a book for many years and it kept getting rejected. And then I found this story, and telling that story was a really healing thing for me. And I think I internalized the message of it so well that my book was actually published the year after that. So it's a very, very special story to me, and I hope you enjoy it. There was once a king and queen who had 3 sons. And as he was getting older, the king thought that the day would come when he would no longer be able to rule. So he called his 3 sons to him, and he said to them, "One day I will no longer be able to rule, and one of you will have to rule in my place. I want you to learn about life and the world, so I'm going to send you out, and your mission in life is to rescue a woman from mortal danger." He was a very traditional king. And so he said to the eldest son, "You are the oldest son, so you will go first." Now, the oldest son was very confident, and he decided that he was not only going to rescue a woman, he was going to rescue a princess. And he was going to rescue her from something like a really ferocious dragon. So he set out, and he rode along, and he rode along. And by the path, he came to an old woman standing, holding a goat. And the woman called out to him, "Oh, prince, oh, prince." She could see he was a prince because of his fine clothes. She said, "Oh, prince, could you please help me? I am too old to milk my goat. Could you please milk it for me?" And the prince said, "Old woman, I would like to help you, but I'm a prince. No one has ever taught me how to milk a goat, so I'm afraid I can't help you." And he rode on. And so he kept riding, and he came along and found a young woman standing by the side of the road, and she was holding a baby. And the young woman said to him, oh, prince, I am no longer able to feed my baby. Can you please help me feed my baby?" And the prince said, "I would like to help you, but I'm a man. No one has ever taught me how to feed a baby, so I'm sorry, but I can't help you." And he rode on. He rode and rode until he went over the border into the next kingdom. And there by the side of the road, he saw an old man standing with an axe over his shoulder. And the man called out to him, oh, prince, can you help me? I am too old to wield this axe. I am the woodcutter to the king. If you would take my job and wield the axe in my stead, I will give you my house and all my tools." And the prince said, "Old man, I'd like to help you, but I have this mission of my own. I have to go out into the world and learn about life and the world. And I have to rescue a woman from mortal danger. And so I'm afraid I can't help you." And he rode on. And eventually he came to the court of the king of that kingdom, and he went into his service, and he became a knight. And he became a very valiant knight, and he fought many, many battles, and he killed many men. But he never had occasion to rescue a woman from mortal danger. So then it was the turn of the second son. And the second son went to his father, and he said to his father, "Father, I don't understand. Why is my brother not suitable to be king? He is a brave knight. He's famous. He's got such a reputation, and he would make a very brave king." And the king said, "It takes more than fighting to make a good king." So the second son set out. He met the same three people, the old woman with the goat, the young woman with the baby, and the old man with the axe. And he replied to them exactly the way that his older brother had done. And then he arrived at the court of the king. But he remembered his father's words. And so he decided that instead of becoming a knight, he would go into service as a courtier. And he learnt fine manners. He learnt diplomacy, he learned statecraft and what it was to rule as a king. But he met many, many women, princesses as well as fine ladies, but he never had occasion to rescue any of them from anything more than boredom. So now it was the turn of the youngest son. And the youngest son went to his father and he said, "Father, I don't understand. Why are my two brothers not suitable to be king? One is a brave knight, the other is a diplomat and a statesman." And the king said, "It takes more than fighting and fine manners to be a king." So it was the turn of the youngest son. But before he set out, he suddenly thought, maybe I should get my mother's advice as well. I mean, there's a revolutionary idea. So he went to his mother and he asked her for her advice. And his mother said, "Well, son, in life, you never know what's round the next corner, but it never hurts to look into your heart." So the boy set out. Now, he was the youngest. He was quite easygoing. He wasn't that adventure-minded. He rode along and he rode along. And as he rode, he looked at the trees, he looked at the flowers, he looked at the fields. He said goodbye to them all. And then he rode on until he came to the old lady with the goat. And the old lady with the goat said, "Oh, Prince, Prince, can you please help me? I can't milk my goat anymore. Would you please help me milk my goat?" And the prince said, "Oh, lady, I'm a prince. Nobody thought to teach me how to milk a goat. Now I think about it, that was a bit of an omission on their part. Can you show me how to milk the goat? If you can do that, then I will gladly help you milk it." "Oh, yes," said the old woman, "that's easy." So the prince got off his horse and the old woman showed him how to milk the goat. And he milked the goat and he filled a bucket full of foaming milk and he handed it to the old woman. And the old woman took it and she said to him, "Thank you. And now that you know how to milk that goat, you can keep it." "Keep it," he said. "What am I going to do with a goat?" But before he could even finish speaking to her, poof, she'd just gone like that. So the prince looked at the goat and the goat looked back at the prince. And the prince said, "Oh, all right then." So he picked up the rope, he tied it to his saddle and he rode on. And soon he came to the young woman with the baby. And the young woman with the baby said, "Oh, Prince, Prince, I am no longer able to feed my baby. Can you help me feed it?" And the prince said, "Young woman, I'm a man. No one taught me how to feed a baby," which now I think about it would really be quite an essential skill. "However, I have this goat and I know how to milk it. So if that's of any help to you." "Oh, yes," said the young woman. "Oh, yes, please." So he got down off the horse, he milked the goat. She showed him how to feed the baby. And when he had fed the baby, she said to him, "Now you need to burp him." And he said, "Sorry, what? Burp him?" She said, yes, I'll show you." So she put the baby on his shoulder. She put a napkin over his shoulder so that the baby was not sick on his fine clothes. And then she showed him how to pat the back of the baby until the baby burped. And then she said to him, "Now that you know how to feed the baby and to burp him, you can keep him." "What?" he said. "What am I going to do with a baby?" But before he'd even finished his sentence, poof, she was gone. So the prince looked at the baby and he looked at the goat, and then he tucked the baby under his arm. The baby was wriggling away. He got the baby under his arm. He managed to tie the rope back on the saddle. He climbed back onto his horse with some difficulty, it has to be said, and he rode on. Passed over the border into the next kingdom, and there was an old man standing by the side of the road with an axe. "Oh no," thought the prince. So he closed his eyes and he looked away and he rode past, kind of whistling, hoping that the old man would not notice him. Oh, prince," said the old man. "Yes, old man, what can I do for you?" "Well," said the old man, "I am the woodcutter to the king, and I am too old now to wield my axe. Would you take my axe and wield it in my stead? I will give you my house and my tools, and you can be the woodcutter to the king." "Look, old man," said the prince, "the thing is, I have this mission of my own. I'm supposed to go out into the world and save a woman, but everything seems to be going wrong. I really don't know what to do. What do you think I should do?" But the old man was too busy tickling the baby and gurgling at it, and the baby was gurgling back. The horse was getting restless. The goat was beginning to bleat. And the prince suddenly remembered his mother's words. In life, you never know what's around the next corner, but it never hurts to look into your heart. So he looked into his heart, and then he smiled, and he said, "You know what? Somehow I have managed to end up with this baby and this goat. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I suppose now it would be useful to have a job so that I could provide for them. So, all right, I will accept your offer." So that was how the prince became a woodcutter. And he moved into the forest to live with the old woodcutter, and the two lived together very harmoniously. The old woodcutter knew everything about the forest, about the different trees, about taking care of the forest, about keeping everything in balance. And the woodcutter enjoyed the time he was there. He settled down, he was happy. The baby grew up into a delightful little boy. And they all lived very happily together. And in time, the prince almost forgot he was a prince because everyone around just called him the new woodcutter. But then occasionally when he was on his own, he would sit there and he would suddenly remember his father back at the kingdom, waiting for him to come home. And he would think about what could he do? But you know, the thing was, there were no dragons in the forest. There weren't any princesses or even fine women. The only women there really were these sturdy farmhands. The only dangerous creature in the forest really was an odd lone wolf that seemed to hang around in the forest, but it wasn't really any threat to anyone. And the farm hands were so sturdy that no sensible wolf would have dared to attack any of those women. So what was to be done? Anyway, one day the prince was sitting there thinking like this when the little boy came running into the room, and he climbed onto his knee and he said, "Daddy, Daddy, I've got to tell you something really funny. There's a little girl who's come down the path to visit her grandmother. She's wearing a red cloak and a red hood, and all the children have called her Little Red Riding Hood. Don't you think that's funny?" And his father said, "Yes, very, very interesting." But he wasn't really listening. He was still thinking about his problem. And then he said to the little boy, "I tell you what, why don't you go outside and play with Granddad, because I'm thinking about something important." So the little boy went outside, and the prince sat there and he thought for a bit more. And then he shrugged and he got up and he went outside. And there was the old woodcutter down on his hands and knees with the little boy on his back, pretending to be a knight and waving a wooden sword about. And the prince stood there and he watched them for a while, smiling. And then he said, "Listen, I'm going into the forest to get some wood. I'll be back soon." And he bent down, he picked up his axe and he put it over his shoulder. And then he set off down the path. And just before he turns the path into a completely different story, the sun came down through the trees and glinted off the axe on his shoulder. And for a moment, it almost seemed as though it was winking at us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Umi, for sharing this story with us. Now, everybody, it's time to land, I'm afraid. So put your feet safely on the ground. Feel the earth beneath you. You might feel a little bit shaky, but that's completely normal. Don't worry. This is the end of our third International Storytelling Festival, and I want to thank you all again for joining us online and offline. If you want to hear more about us and our stories and our adventures, you can find us on www.príbehomnastope.sk or on our social media. Thank you, and we hope to see you next year. Have a wonderful evening.